It's also a problem of they didn't have liquidity, right? That's why they had to sell their bonds. There was not, and
Exactly.
liquidity is this little cash, right? Like I have $10,000 in my bank account and another $50,000 in investment. My net value is what I say, 50 and 10, 60,000. My liquidity is 10,000,
Yep.
right? But the problem with
Yep.
assets is assets change in value consistently. Like if we buy a house for $400,000 and you retire 60 years later, it's worth $1,000,000, right? Assets change in value. So
But look, but a house is illiquid. So if I told you I need you, you've got the house and I need you to sell that house, you're not going to necessarily sell it. It may say if you go to Zillow, it'll say your house is worth $400,000. If you go to sell it, there's nothing that says you're going to get $400,000. Plus, there's going to be an agent's fee and everything else. So that really does play into liquidity. Houses are illiquid.
So I think this is more of a question of just a general, like the general economics. Like when we say net value, like if the company was worth billions upon billions of dollars, that's including all of the assets. Why do we categorize it like that instead of no, they're actually worth what the liquidity is. Like they're actually worth how much cash they have because the assets are fixed, right? The liquidity can come and go, but it's pretty much basic math. The assets can just fluctuate all over the place. So when we say with the net worth of things, it's why do we put more weight on the assets than the actual liquidity?
Well, you shouldn't be.
But we do.
We do, but it's sort of a misnomer.
Mm-hmm.
Remember here, there's something very important. The basic accounting identity is assets minus liabilities equals equity. And really, everybody should be focusing on what the net equity is of any enterprise, whether it's a company, whether it's your personal life. I mean, if you have $1 million house and have a $1.1 million mortgage, your equity is negative $100,000. If you have a $400,000 house and a $200,000 mortgage, your equity is $200,000. So that is how you think of it, and that is how analysts do think of companies. But we always get tripped up by that because you're right. We do tend to think about the assets, and then of course within the assets and liabilities, there are liquid assets and illiquid assets, and there are current liabilities and long-term liabilities. And so there are various accounting identities that people use. They call them current ratio. So what can happen is, and you've heard me talk about this. One of the things I always like to focus on is cash flow. When we talk about is a company making money or not, they always talk about the earnings per share. And then I always want to see what the cash flow is doing, because you know what, you can use all kinds of accounting tricks to massage your earnings per share. That you can say that this was a one-time item, or this is a non-recognizable thing, or we're gonna exclude this, that, and the other. But you can't fake cash flow, and so cash flow is what keeps it current. So all these things sort of work in tandem. There is no one way to measure it, but you're right. If you're just focusing on assets, you're really not getting at anything close to a complete picture. You can look at someone and say, oh, he's got a $5 million house and a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. Well, but if he's indebted up to his eyeballs, he's not worth a thing.
Yeah, the assets are only valuable if the liquidity is there to back it up.
Well, but you have to have the liquidity. You have to have more assets than you have liabilities,
mm-hmm.
and you have to have the liquidity, the cash flow to service your debts. So, in that example of the guy who's hyper levered, if he's got a job that pays him, $1 million a year, presumably, as long as he keeps his job, he can stay current on all his debts. He could pay his mortgage, he could pay his car payments and soldier on and so be it, and just hope he doesn't lose his job. If that all comes to a halt, well, then he doesn't have the liquidity to service his debts. He owes money on that house. He owes money on those cars, and people are going to be looking for it. Well, then what happens is at some point they're going to either foreclose, they're going to repo the car, they'll foreclose on the house. But the lenders don't want to do that because they know that if they take over a $5 million house, they may not be able to sell it for $5 million if that's the value of the mortgage. If they take over the cars depreciate. They may not be able to sell it for that. So it's very much intertwined. So liquidity is really your earnings or your cash flow. In the case of a person, it's your income. In the case of a company, it's really the some combination of income and free cash flow. Can the cash flow service the debts? And are the debts less than the assets? If that equation flips over, you're in real trouble. And in the case of SVB, the liabilities were greater than the assets, and they did not have the cash. And certainly when everybody demanded their money, and their only assets were relatively illiquid, they had to take a haircut. And that's where the bank run comes in.